Hello. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so I think we're just about ready to start. If you're ready, Rabbi.
I am. And
Great.
you may notice that it's daytime where I am.
Yeah, not good evening for you. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Are you still in New York?
I am. I'm in Brooklyn, and I'm going to JFK straight after this class to fly home to Israel.
Oh, wow. Safe travels.
Thank you. I'm going to close this wardrobe behind me.
Okay. Well, welcome to everyone. We're so happy to be back with you for our fourth session of this series of Midrash on the Parashah with Rabbi Dr. Sam Lebens. As you enter the Zoom room, I will invite you to become a panelist. That just means that if you accept, you can turn your camera on if you wish, and you'll be able to unmute yourself when Rabbi Lebens invites questions and comments. When you're not speaking, we just ask you to keep yourself on mute to minimize background noise and to make sure we can all hear each other. You can also put your questions and comments in the chat. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, then if you can put your questions and comments as comments and I will bring them to the Zoom. I will be putting the source sheet in the chat for people who don't have that up yet. It's very useful. And over to Rabbi Lebens.
Hello, I hope you're all well. Nice to see you all. So, Parashat deceptively, we're going to learn a Midrash that I really like, as we do every week. We try and learn a Midrash that I really like. But I just want to warn you, disclaimer, that at some point, if we make it through the hour and we make it through the source sheet, it gets quite hard and philosophically. And I don't want you to think that that's going to commonly be the experience. I don't normally do hardcore metaphysics in my Midrash class, but you'll hopefully see why I found myself tunneling down this rabbit hole when investigating this Midrash. I hope you'll understand in time. Let me just get the source sheet open on my screen. Okay, so, oh no, I did it wrong. Bear with me. Almost. Here. Okay. So the first commandment in this week's Parashah deceptively, we're in the middle of now the commandments concerning the building of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, the portable temple. And the first commandment that we receive, it concerns the oil for the lighting of the menorah. The menorah being the candelabrum. Now, you'll see in the Midrash that the Midrash is focused only at the very end about the oil. And the Midrash that we're going to look at could equally well have been a Midrash about the candelabrum rather than the oil. It's really a Midrash about lighting candles. So there are two physical ingredients to the lighting of the candles. There's the candelabrum and there's the oil. And the candelabrum was in last week's Parashah, in Parashat Teruma. And the oil is in this week's Parashat deceptively. And you might have thought this Midrash could have gone in either place. So one of the questions that I hope to answer about this Midrash is why specifically is it connected to the oil rather than to the candelabrum? Now, in the background of the Midrash, at least, well, no, let's actually put it this way, in the foreground of the Midrash, explicitly in the Midrash, the rabbis are perturbed by the idea that we human beings or the Jewish people should be tasked with providing illumination for God. Okay, now the Midrash we're going to look at has a sister Midrash that's almost identical to it. We're looking at the version that appears in Shemot Rabbah, but a sister version appears in Parashat Tanhuma. It's just a different collection of Midrashim collected in a different time and place. So in Midrash Tanhuma, the suggestion is that the Mishkan needs to have light so that people can see their way in and out. Now, that's a little bit peculiar, actually, the Barbanel, because Maimonides says something similar himself. Maimonides in the Guide to the Perplexed says the reason you need to have a candelabrum in the tabernacle is It's just not nice for it to be dark. You want it to be illuminated. But the Abarbanel asks a pretty cool question, which is, well, if that's the case, why is there a specific commandment to light it during the day and the night? In the day, it just wouldn't have been needed, and it doesn't add all that much. So you might think that the answer of Midrash Tanchuma, why are we commanded to light the candelabrum? Oh, to guide people in and out. Isn't sufficiently explanatory, because that doesn't explain why we have the commandment to keep them lit during the day, providing that sufficient natural light can seep into the place, of course. The Midrash we're going to look at, Midrash Rabbi, is identical pretty much to the Midrash that I've just told you about in Tanchuma, other than the bottom line reason it provides. It suggests that God gave us this commandment to bestow prestige upon the Jewish people. Okay, one day, we'll see inside soon, the people of the world will all say, they'll marvel, and they'll all say about the Israelites that, wow, they provided illumination for the one who illuminates all. Now, again, in the foreground of the Midrash, it's unthinkable to me that the rabbis thought that God needs the light. And I don't imagine that the Gentiles in the end of time who go, oh, look at these Israelites who provided illumination for the one who illuminates everything. It's unlikely to me, I think, that they will think that God needed light in order to see. That's why I sometimes call this class that I give on Parashah Tetzaveh, can God see in the dark? Like, well, yeah, he can see in the dark, right? So he doesn't need the light. And this reminds me of, I don't know if any of you saw, this was the last movie I saw in the movie theatre before COVID. It was a movie called 1917. It was an astonishing movie about the First World War, set in the trenches. And it was edited to look as if the entire movie was one long camera shot, like with no cuts. Now, apparently that's not quite true the way they made it, but it looked that way, and it's astonishing. So you're really there in the trench, following predominantly these two British soldiers around. And there's a part where the two soldiers are discussing, I think it's the Victoria Cross. It's a medal awarded to British troops for bravery. Like, is that in America the purple ribbon or the purple heart, or there's some, well, whatever, some medal for bravery. And when they're talking about it, one of them dismissively says to the other that it's just a bit of tin, right? Like, people die for it. It's just a bit of tin. And the other looks truly shocked and even hurt because his brother had won one. And he said, it's not just a bit of tin. And then after a pause, he adds, it's got a ribbon on it. Like, it's not a comedy. It was the only point in the film where that raised a kind of smile or a laugh for me. I thought it was quite charming, right? Because a great ceremonial honor can be pulled apart and it can be analyzed. And if you do that, you strip away its sense. I recently had a public conversation with Rabbi Joseph Dweck in London, and he mentioned, I can't remember who it was who said it, but he mentioned this quote that I have re-quoted since quite a lot. It said, when you dissect a frog, you learn a lot about a frog. You also kill the frog. It's because you take the knife to the frog and you kill it. And sometimes when you analyze something, you kind of break it apart. You also lose something in the analysis. So yeah, it's a piece of tin, it's a piece of ribbon, but when you analyze it like that, you strip away its sense. A Victoria Cross, it becomes just a piece of tin with a ribbon on it through analysis. But to analyze it that way is to miss something, right? It misses what that tin and ribbon stand for. It symbolizes an honor, and that honor only makes sense in the context of certain shared values between the people bestowing the honor and the people receiving the honor. So if you don't share in the value of the British monarchy and the British government and the British armed forces, then it's going to just be a piece of metal with a ribbon on. But if you buy into the value system that animates that tin and that ribbon, then it will mean something more to you. Right? So lighting a flame for God is as meaningless as any other religious ritual. like when you stop to think about the enormity of God, right? He doesn't need our light, he doesn't need our prayers, he doesn't need any of the rituals we do. But to think about it that way is clearly to miss something. The ritual in the first place wasn't commanded because God needs it. It was commanded according to our Midrash, that we're going to see inside momentarily. It was awarded because God wanted to bestow an honor. And the honor only makes sense in the context of a relationship and a certain shared set of values between God who bestows the honor and the Jewish people who receive it. Right. So actually, even the non-Jewish people are not going to see this as an honor until they buy into the value systems of Torah, in the envisaged end of days. But our two Midrashim, right, the one we're going to look at, and it's almost clone in Midrash Tanchuma. So one of them, like I said, relates to the lighting of the candles as an aid to the humans who enter and leave the tabernacle, and the other Midrash, our Midrash, relates to the lighting of the candles as a ceremonial honor. They do converge upon the following parable, the following mashal, right, in explanation of the commandment. Right, so we're going to look at the Midrash now. And I want to just say one more thing by way of preparation. Those of you who've been in this course for more than one semester, those of you who were with me in Sefer Parashah, in the book of Genesis, as we looked each week at Midrashim, the methodology I'm about to share with you won't be new to you. What I like to do when I look at a Midrash is to analyze these parables, these analogies, which are called mashalim. I like to analyze them as much for what the analog and the analogy have in common, right? So a mashal provides a parable as a story, a metaphor, but it's always an analogy for something else. So A is a mashal for B, right? A is an analogy for B, or A is a metaphor for B. And when the Midrash presents a mashal, I'm always going to be more interested in the ways in which the mashal actually doesn't fit, the way in which A isn't quite a perfect parable for B, or A isn't quite a perfect metaphor for B, or not a perfect analogy for B. And the reason I do that is because the more Midrashim you learn, the more you see that there's often a quite obvious mismatch between, to use the technical Midrashic terms, the mashal and the nimshal. The mashal is the analogy, and the nimshal is what the analogy is an analogy for, the analog, right? There's often a quite prominent mismatch between the mashal and the nimshal, sometimes more prominent, sometimes less prominent. But because they're so often prominent, you get to start looking for the mismatches, even when the mismatches are less prominent, right? Because it is such a common trope of Midrash. You either have to think that the authors of Midrash were just very bad at finding analogies, or you have to recognize that this is actually part of the literary form of Midrash, that the authors of the Midrash are almost playful with their mashalim, and more is often left unsaid than said, because the mashal only explicitly tells you about what the mashal and the nimshal have in common. What's left unsaid is sometimes the very obvious, sometimes the less obvious distance between the mashal and the nimshal. And it's when focusing on the distance that I think you often pierce. So I spoke about what the Midrash says in the foreground. You often pierce to what seems to me to be the quite clear message sometimes that the authors of the Midrash kind of left in the background. Okay, so with that exciting preface in place, we'll turn to the handout. Okay, and the first source is our Midrash. Like I said, ours is the version in Shemot Rabbah. So it says, and they're asking, like, why are we lighting candles for God? And the Midrash says, Lo sha'ani tzarich lahem shetairu li kashem sheha'arti lachem. It's not because I need them to light lights for me, like I light for them. Right? I'm the one who illuminates things to the world. I'm the one who said, Vayehi or, and there was, let there be light, and there was light. I don't need light, they need light, and I don't need them to light for me at all. Okay. So lama. So then why am I commanding them to bring this pure olive oil and put this week's Parashah and to put it in the golden candelabrum of last week's Parashah and light me a light? Why? Well, as I've prepared you for what the Midrash says, it's kedei la'alot etchem bifnei kol ha'umot. It's in order to honor them, to elevate them in the eyes or in the face of all of the nations of the world. Sheyiyu, they will in the future say, Sheyiyu omrim, Yisrael me'irim l'mi sheme'ir l'kol. The Israelites, wow, they illuminated for he who illuminates for all. What an honor. Okay. But then comes the mashal. Like I said, the mashal is the same mashal in Tanhuma as it is in Midrash Rabbah. It says this. Mashal lefikeach v'suma shahayu mahalchim. Pikeach, it comes from the lashon so the root is pei kuf chet, which is to open, right? So it's like liftoach in modern Hebrew, and a pikeach is someone whose eyes are open, right? They can see. But it's sometimes used actually quite often used in Midrashim to describe a wise person as well. A pikeach is someone who can see how things really are. But in this context, because it's a pikeach and a summa is a blind person, we can just read pikeach literally. It means there are two people. One of them, has vision, and the other one, is vision impaired, a blind person and a seeing person. Shahayu mahalchin, and they were walking around together. Amar hapikeach l'summa, the person who could see said to the blind person, Bo va'ani samchecha, come and I will be like your walking stick, right? I will be the thing that you can lean on as we walk around. And I've had the privilege and the actual challenge of guiding a blind person by the arm. The reason I say it's a challenge is because I'm used to supporting perhaps frail old people on my arm to walk somewhere. And you often forget that that's not really what you're doing. What you're doing is guiding them away from obstacles, So, and I wasn't very good at it. But anyway, what is clear is that the blind person, would really rely on a seeing-eyed person for such a job. This is before we were training seeing-eye dogs. Jack Wasserman would like us to share the source sheet. I could share the screen, I suppose, but
I can share the screen with the source sheet, but I'll just post it in the chat as well again, so people can.
Okay. So, so that's what. So this is before seeing eye dogs. It's before. I imagine they may have had the sticks, or whatever. But you can imagine the dependence that the blind person, when walking around in an unfamiliar environment, in unfamiliar terrain, would feel, and therefore the dependence that he or she would feel upon the person who was leading them, who could see. And this allowed the blind person to walk. But when they came into the house, now it's not clear whose house, whether it's the blind person's house or the person who can see. But when they came into the house, the seeing-eyed person said to the blind person, say, which literally means, well, I think it comes from sate, right? Which is to exit, but you do see in the Bible as well, say is to go, to go, selamat, go out and learn, right? So go, and in this context, it's not exiting, it's entering, right? Selabayit, go into the house, v'hadlek li et haner, and light for me the light, v'ha'erli, and then I'll be able to see inside the house. Shelo tieh machzik li tova, shelaviticha, because I don't want you to be machzik li tova. Machzik li tova means something like feeling indebted to me, feeling that you owe me a favor. Let's imagine, God forbid, that you were the blind person, and I was a sighted person, and I led you around all day outside in unfamiliar terrain. And I'm aware that you probably feel a little bit kind of indebted to me. And I don't want you to feel indebted to me. I don't want you to have that feeling. So when we come into the dark house, I say, hey, would you go and turn the light on for me so that you've now done me a favor? Okay. So that's why I told you to light the candle. That's the metaphor, that's the mashal. And then it says, as the Midrash often does, it explicitly tries to unpack the Midrash for you. It says as follows. It explicitly attempts to unpack the mashal for you. And it does so as follows. the person who can see in our metaphor, in our mashal, in the nimshal, that person is God, the Holy One, blessed be He. And why is that an appropriate metaphor? The Mishnah explains. Shnema, it says in Divrei Yamim, Ki Hashem einav heiman mushtatot b'chol haaretz. Right, in Divrei Yamim, God is described as placing his eye kind of searchingly across the surface of the land, right? So the Bible describes God as seeing all. So it's a very appropriate mashal. God is the one who can see. For Hasuma, who's the blind one? Elu Yisrael, these are the Israelites. Shnema, because it says about the Israelites in the book of Isaiah, Negashashak Ibirim Kir. They kind of stumble, fumble like blind people along a wall. You know, you might be putting your hands on the wall to guide you along. That's what the Jewish people do. Uke'ein einayim, and like people who've got no eyes. Negashesha, keshalmu v'tzaharayim keneshe. They're stumbling along in the middle of the day, even at noontime, right? Even at noontime, they stumble kaneshet, as if they were in the dark. Okay, so then the Midrash does a little Midrash within the Midrash about when were the Jewish people blind? And of course, if you go and look in Isaiah 59, which is where that verse comes from, it's in its own context, but the Midrash applies it to a different context because the Midrash likes to do that, right? So it applies it to the sin of the Chet HaEgel. When the Jewish people made the golden calf, they were blind. And you can read this verse in Isaiah, despite the different context in which we find it. You can read this verse in Isaiah aptly to describe the Jews who made the golden calf. Why did that verse and that sin in particular? Well, if you look very carefully in Parashah Kitisa, the Jews were waiting for Moses to come down the mountain, and he delayed, and then they built the golden calf. And it tells you what time of day they built it, right? They built it b'sheish sha'ot, 6 hours into the day. Now, the way halachic time works is you've got 12 hours of sunlight and 12 hours of daylight, and it doesn't matter, whether you're in the winter or the summer. You divide the hours get longer or shorter, but you divide the daylight time and the night time, the dark time into 6 portions, right? So into 12 portions each. So the 6th hour of the day is always noon, right? So the Jewish people built the golden calf at noon. And yet in the book of Isaiah, it says the Jews are like people blind who even at noon are acting as if it's dark. So it's like a literary connection between Isaiah and the golden calf. So it's cute, but I think it could distract us. It's not the main point of the Midrash. And it says, and then it says, like, where do you get the idea that God, who has eyes, leads the blind around like the Pikeach and the Summa do in our mashal? Well, it's like this. God lit things up for them and guided them around. Where do we see that? Actually, before the sin of the golden calf, Shnema, as it says in the chapter 13 of the book of Exodus, God went before them in the daytime. If you carry on the quote, you should always carry on the quote. When the Midrash or a Gemara quote half a pasuk, they were quoting half a pasuk to an audience that knew all of the pasukim off by heart, right? And sometimes the most important part of the pasuk is the part that they're not even quoting. It's just an aid memoir. They don't need to quote the whole pasuk. But the entire pasuk, which I brought in the English, says, where is it? I'm scrolling down. The Lord went before them in a pillar of cloud by day to guide them along the way. And you carry on. I only gave you a little bit more of the verse. I didn't give you the whole verse. There's also also fire by night, right? So there's God illuminating, literally with fire. But so you've got this actually God illuminating, God guiding. God can see. The Jewish people are blind. What a perfect mashal. And then Kevan Shabaula Sota Mishkan, when they came to build the tabernacle, Karala Moshe Amarlo, they called to Moses, and they said to him, or somebody called to Moses and said to him, I suppose God called to Moses and said to him, "Vayikhu elecha zayit zach, bring for me pure olive oil," right? Which is this week's Parashah and its commandment to bring the oil to light in the Torah, in the Mishkan. Amru Yisrael, but the Jews said, "Ki ata ta'in eri," which is a beautiful quote from the book of Tehillim. But you're the one that lights my candle, or as they say, "Come on, baby, light my fire." But that's where it comes from. It says you're the one that lights my fire. The Jews say to God, right? Why are you asking me to light your fire? Right? It's beautiful, right? But and you say that I should light up for you. I'm the blind one. You're the one that sees, and you're the one that illuminates for me. And you're saying that I should light up your home. Amalehem, God said to them, it's in order to elevate you. That you should illuminate for me. Just like I illuminate for you. Therefore it said, Zayit Ra'anan. This is a verse from Jeremiah. You can see inside in your own time, 11:16. But in Jeremiah 11:16, God compares Jeremiah, speaking on behalf of God, compares the Jewish people to a verdant olive tree, right? You are my olive tree. Now, the exercise I would ask you to do, if we had more than an hour and I'd sent you out to learn this together and think about it in Chevutot and discuss, the exercise I would ask you to do is to think of all of the most salient ways in which the mashal is not a good mashal, in which there's something that doesn't quite fit here. Okay. Now, I'm going to give you straight away the most obvious one that I think is the most obvious one structurally, is that in the mashal itself, the blind person is asking the sighted person to light the candle so that they should no longer feel indebted. But that's completely lost in the nimshal, right? God doesn't say, you say, well, oh, but you light my fire. How am I supposed to light your fire? And God says, oh, well, I'm doing it now so that you shouldn't feel so indebted to me because I led you around outside for so long, right? That's disappeared. Okay, and that happens in the Tanchuma as well. The Tanchuma offers a different reason. The reason in the Tanchuma is just so that you should be able to see your way in and out of the Mishkan. Like in both of the Midrashim, that seemingly very important detail of the mashal, the reason for this particular illuminating commandment, it disappears from the nimshal. The second question or element I will give you, straight away, is the one I started with, which is, why is this pasha connected to the olive oil? Well, that's brought in explicitly in Jeremiah 11:16, right? It's to do with the oil, but why couldn't this midrash have been connected to the candelabra? Is there something more apt about the mitzvah of the oil than the mitzvah of the candelabra? And then this isn't even the mitzvah of lighting it so much. You could have done it in Bahalotacha, in the book of Numbers, where the commandment is reiterated and given specifically to Aaron to put the oil in the candelabra and actually light it, right? So why is it here is a question I would ask. Now, just to be clear, let me just mark that, that's a different type of question. It's not a question about a misfit between mashal and imshal, but it's just another question I'd like you to have in the background. But then I would ask you to go deeper in your scrutinizing and testing of the nimshal, of the fit between the mashal and the nimshal. And I think when you do, it takes us into a quite daring place. Okay, some years ago, I visited a place called Dialogue in the Dark, which is it's sometimes known as like the Blind Museum in Cholon. It's like an experiential museum. It's an immersive museum that kind of studies or presents the experience of blindness to people who can see. visitors to the exhibit are guided through many different environments: outdoors, indoors, urban environments, rural environments, and it's all done in pitch black darkness, right? Without even a scintilla of natural or artificial light. So it's really hard. And visitors, when they're there, they're guided through these different environments by people with severe visual impairments, right? Either no vision at all, or severe visual impairment. And in that space, I was rendered completely helpless. Right? I remember it was really bad because I was a madrich, I was a leader on a trip when I went to that museum, and we had all these 15-year-old kids who were just running around like wild, and I was terrified. And I was so glad they couldn't see me because I was so terrified. And what I did is I just clung on for dear life to the arms of this blind guide, who in my mind's eye was like a Herculean kind of hero because he was fine in there, completely fine. But I was finding it really, really hard. And then it made so given that I've had that experience, when I look back at this mashal, something quite obvious strikes me, which is that actually it would be easier for a blind person to light a candle in a completely dark room than it would be for someone who could see. And that's pretty shocking when you think about it in the context of the mashal and its nimshal, right? And then I was thinking, well, perhaps the message of the rabbis is this. Somehow, I mean, the secret message, the hidden message is clearly not the explicit message, but a message that kind of emerges when you test the mashal and see the ways in which it falls down. That there's some respect in which we, the Jewish people, are better placed to perform certain mitzvot, or to bring, metaphorically, to bring God's light into the world, than God is himself. Now that's a daring suggestion to read into the rabbis. And that's why I'm going to throw us now headlong into some quite hard philosophy. And I warned you at the beginning, because the reason is that there is a debate, substantive literature about the theology and the philosophy of Chazal, the philosophy and the theology of the authors of the Talmud and the Midrash, right? And some people like to say that notions like omnipotence, omniscience, omnibenevolence, as the etymology of the words would suggest, some people like to say that those concepts came from Greek philosophy, and they enter into kind of Jewish theology only once there had been a systematic exposure of rabbis to quite sophisticated, Neoplatonized Aristotelian philosophy, in the 11th century and onwards, maybe the 10th century and onwards, Sajigon in the 10th century. Now, sometimes I'm sympathetic to that, because Chazal are not Aristotelians, and Chazal are not perfect being theologians, and Chazal are much happier anthropomorphizing God than Maimonides is, and I understand where the academics are coming from when they want us to be cautious before applying quite modern Greek-infused theological concepts to the rabbis' thought. But I do think the rabbis thought of God as omnipotent. And in fact, they have the phrase, Hakol Yachol, the being who is able to do all. Well, that's a very nice definition of omnipotence. And therefore, I do think they thought of God as omnipotent. I don't think they thought there was anything he couldn't do. So how can they get away with this midrash? So we can share the screen again, Lilinas, with the handout. What I've done here on the handout is I've given you a list of definitions of omnipotence: D1, D2, D3, they go all the way down to D8. Okay. Now, I didn't make these up. They come from a paper by a teacher and mentor of mine, Professor Dean Zimmerman at Rutgers University, and he in this paper is trying to reverse engineer a theory of omnipotence that he finds in the work of another philosopher from Oxford called Professor Richard Swinburne. Richard Swinburne's original discussion of omnipotence, if you're interested, can be found in a classic book of his called The Coherence of Theism. And Dean Zimmerman's discussion of Richard Swinburne's discussion of omnipotence can be found in a book that's about Richard Swinburne called, I think it's called Faith and Reason, or Reason and Faith. It's definitely those two words. I just can't remember the order. Faith and Reason, Reason and Faith. Celebrating the work of Richard Swinburne. So the way we go is we start like this. Okay, let's try and define omnipotence. What do we mean when we say God is omnipotent? And in fact, the first shot is really close to the Hebrew, right? It's Hakol Yachol. It's the being that can do anything, right? So D just says X is an omnipotent being, is defined as this. For any state of affairs, S, X can intentionally bring S about. Right? X can make anything happen. Right? You're omnipotent if you can make anything happen. Right? That's the first. That's our first shot at a definition. But it quickly as we scrutinize the definition, it quickly appears to us that there are some knotty or thorny issues that arise in the wake of this definition. Okay, and in order to make this less a detour through 20th and 21st century Christian analytic theology, I thought I'd bring in a Jewish voice at this point. So between D and D1, you can have the Rambam. The Rambam can complain about D, and he says the following. This is from the Guide to the Perplexed, the 3rd volume, the 15th chapter. He says, "We do not ascribe to God the power of doing what is impossible. No thinking man denies the truth of this maxim." Clearly, Maimonides wouldn't have thought Descartes was a thinking man, because Descartes does deny the truth of this maxim. Descartes thinks that God can even do the impossible, but Maimonides is true that is right that it's almost never found among rationalistic philosophers, the belief that God can do the impossible. He says, none ignore this view or this limitation except he who has no idea of logic. If you understand how logic works, you understand that God can't do the impossible. How and why? I think the rationale is something like this. Impossible states of affairs aren't really states of affairs at all, because when you try to describe an impossible state of affairs, what comes out of your mouth is just a string of nonsense. So, for instance, you ask, can God make a shape that is a perfect square and also a perfect circle all at once in Euclidean space? Don't get clever with me, right? In Euclidean space, can God make something which is perfectly square and perfectly circle? Can God make something in our visual field appear to be totally green, right? Green all over, but also blue all over, or red or whatever all over? Can God make 2 + 2 = 5? Famously, can God lift a stone too heavy for God to lift? Right? Well, if you think all of these describe impossible states of affairs, then actually square circle is as meaningful a phrase in English as blah, blah, blah. So when you say God can't make a square circle, you've basically just said God can't make a blah, blah, blah. And that's not to limit God. It's just not a limitation. Right? And if you said, oh, no, God can make a blah, 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 what have you said? You haven't really said anything, because impossibilities aren't things. That's at least the motivation. And I know some of you may be uncomfortable with it, because Descartes was himself, okay? And also in the mystical tradition, there people say, no, but God defines what possibility is, and God can make the impossible possible. But I want you to know at least there is a respectable school of thought that thinks God can't do the impossible, okay? So what that leads us to is D1, okay, which is like a fixed definition. It says, okay, X is an omnipotent being if for any possible state of affairs S, X can intentionally bring S about. Yoffi. Okay, so we've solved that problem. Right, but then there are some other problems. There may be states of affairs which can't be, no, they can't, they're possible states of affairs, but they can't possibly be brought about by anybody. For example, a billiard ball rolling down a hill as the result of pure chance with nobody intending it, right? That's a possible state of affairs, but it can't intentionally be brought about by anyone, because if you intentionally brought about, it wouldn't be a billiard ball rolling down a hill without anybody having intended it, right? So we don't want to give that, meaning D1 is still problematic because it still seems to be attributing to God impossible powers, because it's right, if you've understood my example. Also, there are some states of affairs which are not just possible, they're necessary, right? So necessary states of affairs are things like 2 + 2 = 4. You can't make 2 + 2 = 5. All bachelors are unmarried men. You can't make it the case that something is both a bachelor and an unmarried man. So it's always going to be the case that all bachelors, even if there's 0 of them, but for any X, if X is a bachelor, it's unmarried. That's a necessary truth, right? And you might think that, well, things which are necessarily true, they're not brought about by anybody. They're just true. You don't, two didn't need God to make it the case that 2 of them are 4. It's just like necessarily the case. So given these 2 worries, worry 1, there are some states of affairs which are possible, but can't possibly be brought about by anyone, and which might render D1 problematic because it's giving God impossible powers still. And the second worry, there are some states of affairs which are possible, but they just don't need to be brought about by anybody at all. Not it would be weird to say God brought them about. It could lead you to sharpen the definition still further. This leads us to D2. D2 says X is an omnipotent being, means this: for any contingent state of affairs, that contingent means non-necessary. That's a state of affairs that could be, but doesn't have to be, right? So for any contingent state of affairs S that could possibly be intentionally brought about by someone, right? So that rules out states of affairs like the billiard ball accidentally rolling down a hill, right? So we're talking about contingent states of affairs that could possibly be intentionally brought about by someone. X can bring about S. So it's not quite Hakol Yachol anymore, right? It's Hakol, but with some exceptions. And the exceptions are the impossible, the unintentional, the necessary, okay? I can see there are lines being drawn on the page, but
yes, I'm just fixing that.
Okay, don't worry. Okay, so then we get to D3. Now, I'll just tell you very briefly. You can study this at home if you like, and you can rewatch the video if you would like to kind of hear again the explanation of what's going on in D3. But Dean Zimmerman and Richard Swinburne are both convinced that God can't change the past, and that having the ability to change the past is no part of what omnipotence demands. Okay, and I actually disagree with Zimmerman and Swinburne on this issue. Tyrone Goldschmidt and I have written a paper called "The Promise of a New Past." And we think it is. We think it's not absurd to think that God could have the power to change the past. But if you agree with the majority of rational philosophers through time, apart from me and Tyrone Goldschmidt, you'll also think that God can't change the past. So D3 is designed just to fix that. And so it goes like this: X is an omnipotent being if, for any state of affairs which is contingent and which could possibly be intentionally brought about by someone, and for any time T, if S is possible given the course of history up to including T, then X can intentionally bring S about, right? Basically, it's ruling out states of affairs once it's too late for them to be possible, right? Once the milk has been spilt, it's no longer possible for the spilt milk to be unspilt. And so that's what D3 tries to kind of engineer. And if you're interested in figuring out how it works, I've given you the ingredients. It sometimes takes thinking it through once or twice. Okay, then they edit it again for a reason that I'm not sure I agree to, but a lot of Kabbalists will agree to. Okay, some people think it very important that God should have the power to make himself in the future less powerful. right? So God should have the power to take away his own omnipotence. Now, Christians might think that's important because they think of God as having suffered on the cross. And people who belong to a Kabbalistic tradition called Tzimtzum Kepshuto, who really believe that God constrains himself and quite literally renders himself less powerful at some times than he is at other times, for them, D4 will be important. What we say is we no longer say that something is omnipotent. We say something's omnipotent at a certain time. Right? So you can be omnipotent at one time and not omnipotent at a later time. Okay, and that's what D4 is all about. So it says X is an omnipotent being at T for some time, is defined as follows for any state of affairs. If the state of affairs is contingent, if the state of affairs is the sort of thing that could be brought about by someone intending it, right? If the past doesn't rule out S, right? Then X is omnipotent at T if S can, sorry, X is omnipotent at T if X can make S obtain at T. See how complicated this is? Trying to define Hakol Yachol, and then you've got to put in some exceptions. You realize you've got to put in some exceptions, and then just trying to kind of fine tune what the exceptions need to be to come to an account that's plausible. Now, you might think there are some states of affairs which are possible, okay, which the past doesn't rule out, which, you know, but are such that only I can bring them about. For example, very nice, Jack. So past, present, and future are time bound and they don't apply to God. God is outside of time, but even from God's eternal present, as he looks at all times, so no time is future for him, no time is past for him, all times are present for him. Nonetheless, from our perspective, sometimes a past is sometimes a present and sometimes a future. And what we recognize is that from God's eternal present, if God has already made such and such the case in the region of time that we call past, then he's not gonna undo that, you know. Meaning, I think you could believe in D4 without necessarily thinking God is temporal, and Zimmerman makes that point in his paper, and he tries to spell out, you know, the different ways in which this would have to be articulated if you had a slightly different theory of God's relationship to time. Okay, let's look at DX, sorry, D5. I think the problem that we're looking at D5, yeah, thank you. Yeah, okay, the problem we're worried about is even God can't make it the case that Samuel Lebens freely plays football. God can make me play football, right? But if he's making me play football, it's not a free thing, right? So God can't make it the case that Samuel Lebens freely plays football. Now, Samuel Lebens freely playing football is a highly unlikely state of affairs, but it's not impossible. Okay, so it's a contingent state of affairs. It's not ruled out by history, by the past, right? The past just makes it unadvisable, but it doesn't make it, the past doesn't make it impossible that Samuel Lebens will play football. But God can't bring that state of affairs about. He can't make Samuel Lebens freely play football. And very few people would say that means God isn't omnipotent. So we're going to have to tighten our definition yet again, okay? And so that's what D5 is about. We say, okay, X is omnipotent at some time. If he can bring any state of affairs about, so long as A, the state of affairs is a sort of thing that could be brought about by someone, B, the state of affairs is a sort of thing that could be brought about even after history has unfolded as it's unfolded, and 3, that S is a sort of state of affairs that X can intentionally bring about, right? So it almost comes out like this: you're omnipotent if you can do everything that you can do. Okay, well, that's problematic. Sam Lebens, there are loads of things I could do that I don't do. So I've not maxed out my possible powers. So I'm not omnipotent according to D5. But a pebble in my backyard is currently doing all the things it could possibly do, namely nothing, because pebbles can't do anything. But if a pebble can't do anything, then it is currently doing everything it could possibly do. So by D5, it's omnipotent. So that's a problem, right? So you fix it with D6. And you say, okay. What it means for X to be omnipotent is, first of all, X needs to be the sort of thing that can do stuff. And it needs to be such that, like, it can bring about any state of affairs that it could possibly bring about. So it needs to be the sort of thing that can do stuff. It also needs to be the sort of thing that could do anything that it wanted to do that were possible for it to do. And this is also problematic. Alvin Plantinga, great philosopher from, we've got 10 minutes. I'm going to do it. I got Alvin Plantinga, a really great philosopher from Notre Dame. He comes up with this really stupid being called Muk'ir. Muk'ir is an animal that somehow, even logically, necessarily, there's only one action it can do intentionally. It can scratch its left ear. It's the only action it can do. So that would be an omnipotent being by D6, because it can act and it can do everything that it possibly could do. So it's omnipotent. And no one would want to say that Muk'ir is omnipotent, right? So good. And oh, by the way, there's another reason why you might want to do D5, right? Another reason why you've got to say, like, you know, God shouldn't have to bring about all possible states of affairs. He shouldn't have to be able to bring about me freely playing football. That's one thing. But also you might think God by his nature, just like Muk'ir by his nature can't do anything but scratch his left ear, God by his nature can't kill innocent babies. God can't kill innocent babies. His nature won't let him do that. But that we don't think that he's not omnipotent because he can't kill innocent babies. So there is some motivation here for thinking that, okay, you're omnipotent as long as you can do everything that you can do. Like, and God can't kill innocent babies. That doesn't stop him being omnipotent. That's not something he can do. God can't make me freely play football. That doesn't stop him being omnipotent. To be omnipotent is to do everything you can do. But the problem with that is it starts to look like Muk'ir is omnipotent, and that's simply not satisfactory. So what you end up with is D7 or D8. I'm not going to look inside with you. D7 is Swinburne's version, and D8 is Zimmerman's own attempt. Okay, the idea is something like this: you take all of the beings who have the ability to max out their powers. So there's loads of things I can do, but I'll never be able to do all of the things I can do. So I'm not the sort of being that can max out my powers. Muk'ir, by the way, he can max out his powers, right? But he's just got very, very few powers. I've got many more powers than Muk'ir, but I can't max out. Muk'ir has many fewer powers than me, but he can max out. So then what you do is you take all of the beings that are able to, oh, no, that's wrong, sorry. I told you that D7 is Swinburne's and D8 is Zimmerman's. That's not right. Sorry. D7 and D8 are both Swinburne's. There's a D9 in Zimmerman's paper that I'm just not sharing with you, and D9 is Zimmerman's own. D7 is a definition of what it means to be the sort of being that can max out, right? What does it mean to be as powerful as you can be? It means to max out, okay? And then what D8 asks you to do is take all of the beings that are able to max out. So there's Muk'ir, who can scratch his left ear, and he can do all the things he could possibly do. There's maybe Muk'ir and nose, who can pick his nose and scratch his ear, and he's able to do both of them. I'm not one of these beings because I have lots of powers, but I'm not able to max out. I'm not able to do at any given time to be doing all of the things I could possibly do. What D8 asks you to do is to compare all of the possible beings that can max out and find the most powerful of them, the one that has the most powers. So it's having the most powers and being able to max out the powers you have. That's what makes you omnipotent. It's very cool. It might not work, but it's a really brilliant attempt to find omnipotence in the face of all of these problems which begin with the problem that the Rambam notes in the Guide to the Perplexed. Okay. Now, yeah, I have to tell you, Ozzy, I'm committed to the idea that a leaf doesn't fall without God willing it to. But a leaf falling is not impossible. And a leaf falling is not something that history rules out. And a leaf falling is not something that the leaf freely does. Okay, so I think that Swinburnian omnipotence is powerful enough to give you a God that literally controls every physical process that ever occurs. But we're not going to get into it now. I want to wrap up in 6 minutes. What I want to say is this, right? Going back to the Midrash. Remember the Midrash? Perhaps the message of the rabbis is this: God might be perfect, but his very perfection renders him unable to bring light into an imperfect world. At least not without the help of people whose so-called imperfections actually render them more qualified to act in the darkness. God's omnipotence means there's many more things he can do than me, but it doesn't mean there aren't some things I can do that he can't do. That's what I've been trying to show you, right? God could be omnipotent, and yet it could still be true that there are some things I can do that he can't do, right? Perhaps, so perhaps we are God's verdant olive tree. Why? Because there's a sense in which God can't illuminate the darkness of the world without our cooperation. Like, we are the thing that burns. And that's why it's this week's Parashah. Right? It's as if the official position of the Midrash is that God doesn't need our light. That's what the Midrash says, at the surface. But the hidden message waiting to be unpacked is that there's a sense in which God does need our light. Right? So as we've said, God can't make it the case that 2 + 2 = 5. There's loads of things that God can't do. And perhaps the point of the Midrash, or the Midrashim, because it's Tanchuma and Midrash Rabbah, is that God's perfection and our imperfection means that there are some really good things that only we can do, right? Or which we can do at least more easily, like a blind person finding a candle and lighting it in the darkness. And in fact, the point might be that our weakness in certain circumstances becomes strengths, which is what happens in the Blind Museum, right? And sometimes it's only the blind who can bring God's light into a world of darkness. God can't enter space, according to some people. I mean, Aussies would definitely be right to raise an objection there, because the Kabbalists think that God can enter space, and this is a different discussion. But there are many robustly respected Jewish theologians who think God can't enter into space because that's a limitation. We can, right? So we can stand on the corner and proclaim the glory of God. God can't stand on the corner because he can't come into space. So we can do it for him because we're less perfect than him, right? So sometimes it's only the blind who can bring God's light into a world of darkness, right? And the idea is, if we rise to the occasion, if we really do function as God's olive tree, right, as his olive oil, then in the end of days, when the nations rejoice and recognize, they'll see what happened. They'll say, wow, right, the Jewish people were actually keeping God's flame alight in the world, right? And they served a role that, so to speak, God couldn't have done, right? So it's a radical midrash. But the reason I wanted to take you through this quite labored detour through contemporary metaphysical theology is because you read this midrash and you think, oh, that's just Chazal. Chazal don't have an all-powerful God anyway. Well, no, it's not necessarily true. You really could have a definition of omnipotence that is a robust definition of omnipotence, a well-motivated definition of omnipotence, because omnipotence, if you don't define it carefully, gives rise to all sorts of paradoxes and contradictions. But when you do define omnipotence in a careful and robust way, it turns out it's quite consistent with the message of this midrash. And there's no reason to see this midrash as in conflict with classical theology that says that God is Hakol Yachol, God is omnipotent. We did it. That's it. We've got 2 minutes. Questions, answers. But forget the philosophy if you found it too hard, or you can watch it again. I think methodologically, the thing I really want you to concentrate on the Midrash is, I hope, an exhibition of this style of learning Midrash where you squeeze the mashal for the tension between the mashal and the nimshal that helps you to find the hidden message, so to speak, of the Midrash. Well, that's so kind of you. Thank you very much. I love teaching Midrash because you guys are the biggest, most encouraging audience. You know, in academia, you can have your ego bruised a lot from time to time. You guys are such a receptive and interested, enthusiastic audience. So Ozzy says, I would say that God chooses not to, hold on a second, I lost it. I'm just opening the chat. I would say that God chooses not to bring light into the world, not that he can't. That's an absolutely legitimate reading. So you could read this Midrash through the eyes of various Kabbalistic readings that talk about Tzimtzum, and Tzimtzum being like this idea that God chooses to rein in his powers. But you should know, Ozzy, there are some people who think that that's not even possible, that to choose to limit yourself is to choose to be vulnerable, and that's the sort of thing an omnipotent being couldn't do, because an omnipotent being can't be vulnerable, because a being who is essentially omnipotent, that's to say a being who couldn't possibly suffer, is a more powerful being than a being who could choose to suffer. You might think other intuitions differ about this, okay? But two things to say. One is there are some Kabbalists who say, just like you do, Ozzy, no, God chooses to hide his full power, and that would also lead to a consistent reading of this Midrash. The other thing you could say is, but I'm worried that an omnipotent being can't rein in his powers, because that would be an imperfection. And then I think it was D4. D4 is for you, because D4 gives you a definition of omnipotence that allows it to be the case that God is all powerful at some times, but not to others. I mean, to say that D4 is a definition of omnipotence that allows for a God who can choose to withhold his powers or restrain his powers. So even that Kabbalistic option that you offer, Ozzy, might require some philosophical footwork, at least as far as D4 on our handout. And I think Jack put his hand up. Oh no, he didn't. It's just that my cursor looks like a hand, and it was on the middle of Jack's name. Okay, that's the end. We've got to 2:01. So I'm gonna leave you there. I'll hand you back to Lily Naz, and I look forward to seeing you next time, everybody.
Wow, thank you so much.
Thank you. It won't be so hard next time. No metaphysics next time, I promise.
Okay, well, thank you, Rabbi Lebens, and thank you for everyone for participating in our learning community and all your amazing questions. Next week, this class will not be meeting because Rabbi Lebens will be participating in another Drisha event, which is focused on Purim. If you want to find out more about Purim at Drisha, you can go to purim.drisha.org and sign up for that, for what Rabbi Lebens will be doing for Purim with Drisha. If you would like to learn more about our other shirim, including Dr. John Kelson's Haftarah shir on Thursdays, or conversations on the Parashah also on Thursdays, you can go to drisha.org and find out more. So see you very soon.
See you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.